The first thing Serena Valley noticed was the rust, not the man standing beside it, not the boy in the soccer jersey holding a scratched yellow ball keychain, not the way the man's hand rested on the hood like he was touching something wounded. Not worthless, just the rust. It spread across the faded vitamin C orange paint of the 1970 Plymouth Cuda like old bruises, crawling around the cracked windshield, the dusty fenders, and the dull black grille that looked as if it had not seen daylight in years. The car sat just outside the VIP parking entrance of Harbor Point Soccer Stadium, half on the access lane, half beside the old row of service garages the stadium had been trying to erase from its expansion maps. Behind it, parents were walking their children towards Saturday soccer practice. In front of it, Serena Valley stopped with two assistants, an operations manager and a sponsor representative waiting behind her. "What is that thing doing outside my stadium?" she said. No one answered at first. The tow strap was still hanging loose from the back of Luca's Mercer S pickup, and Lucas had one hand on the Cuda S dusty fender. He was 39. Tired in the way single fathers get tired when sleep becomes a luxury and bills become weather. His gray work shirt had old oil stains that no washing machine could remove. His boots were cracked at the toes. His son Owen, 9 years old, stood 3 steps behind him in shin guards and a blue practice jersey, quiet enough to disappear if you were the kind of person who only noticed important people. Serena was not that kind of person. She noticed him only after she had already decided what his father was. Lucas said, "It'll be moved in a few minutes. I just brought it out of storage bay 7. Serena looked from the car to him, then to the stadium glass behind her, where her own reflection stood clean and expensive in a black suit. Storage bay 7 belongs to the stadium redevelopment zone. That row is scheduled for clearance. "I have a release," Lucas said. "Abandoned property disposition. Paid $500 this morning." That made one of Serena's assistants laugh under his breath. Serena did not hide hers. $500? she said, loud enough for the parents near the entrance to hear. "You paid $500 for this?" She pointed at the Cuda as if the car had offended her personally. "Mr. Mercer, this is not a restoration show. This is a professional sports venue. I have investors walking through this entrance in 20 minutes, and you dragged a junkyard corpse into the VIPA lane." Owen lowered his eyes. A boy from his team slowed down nearby. Staring at the car, the boy's father smirked and whispered something that carried too easily in the open air. "Guess some people will buy anything if it's cheap." Lucas heard it, Owen heard it, Serena heard it too, and instead of correcting the moment, she used it. "Move your scrap," she said, "or I'll have it removed." Lucas did not raise his voice. He did not explain that he had finished a night shift checking generator panels under the stadium before pulling this car out with a hand winch and a borrowed battery lantern. He did not tell her. He had skipped breakfast so Owen could have new socks for practice. He only looked at the Cuda again, the way a doctor looks past a dirty coat to the pulse underneath. The faded orange hood was jammed but not locked. Lucas pressed the latch twice, listened, then slid his fingers under the edge and lifted just enough to see into the engine bay. Dust rolled off in a thin brown sheet. Serena folded her arms, impatient. Owen watched his father's face and saw something change there, so small that no one else would have noticed. Lucas reached into his pocket for an old rag. He wiped one careful line across the firewall near the driver's side, not polishing, not cleaning for beauty, just clearing enough grime to see metal. Under the dirt and thin overspray was a rough hand-stamped mark, uneven and almost hidden. PX17. Lucas froze, but only for half a second. He covered the surprise before Serena could read it. But Owen saw his father's thumb stop moving. "What are you doing now?" Serena snapped. Lucas let the hood settle back down gently, looking one to make it less ugly. 5 days later. In the VIP room above that same stadium entrance, Serena Valley would stand in front of board members, sponsors, and collectors, while a retired factory archivist placed one finger on a photo of that same stamp. The room would go so quiet that Owen would hear the ice settle in a glass across the table. But on that Saturday morning, all anyone saw was a poor single dad beside a rusted old car, and a CEO powerful enough to decide where he did not belong. Before we go further, if you have ever watched someone stay calm while being disrespected, stay with Lucas for a little while. This is a fictional story about fathers, old machines, and the value people miss when they only look at the surface. And if you are listening from a garage, a truck, a kitchen, or a late shift somewhere, Tell us where you are. Someone like Lucas might be listening too. The morning had started before sunrise in the back corner of Harbor Point's maintenance corridor, where the stadium lights hummed even when the field was empty. Lucas worked the kind of job no one clapped for. He checked backup panels, tightened loose brackets, replaced cracked rubber on service carts, and answered calls from people who only remembered his name when something stopped working. Harbor Point Soccer Stadium was Serena Vale's crown jewel, a glass and steel monument wrapped around a professional club. Weekend youth tournaments, concerts, charity matches, and the kind of VIP experience donors liked to photograph. The old service garages along the east side did not fit the image. They had been there before the stadium expansion, before the luxury suites, before Serena bought the surrounding lots through Vale Sports Holdings and began calling the neighborhood an entertainment district. Lucas rented the smallest of those garages month to month. It had a rolling door that shook in the wind, a concrete floor with a long crack through the middle, and a sink that coughed before giving water. To Lucas, it was more than a workspace. It was where he could fix a neighbor's alternator after midnight, change brakes for half what dealerships charged, and keep Owen's world steady when everything else felt priced above them. 5 years earlier, in 2021, Lucas had buried his wife Maya after a sudden illness that took more from him than he knew how to name. Since then, his life had become measured in school forms. Cheap dinners, late invoices, and the effort not to let his son see fear as often as Lucas felt it. Owen played soccer because Maya had loved the game. She used to kick a ball with him in the driveway when he was small enough to laugh every time he missed. The yellow ball keychain on Owen's backpack had been hers first, a little plastic thing from a fundraiser. Nothing valuable except to the two people who had kept it. That Saturday, Owen had a practice match on the stadium's community field. Lucas had promised to watch at least the second half after clearing the storage bay. He had not planned on buying a car. He had gone there because Derek Shaw, the stadium operations manager, told him the old storage row was being emptied and that anything unclaimed would be sold, scrapped, or hauled away by Monday. The Cuda had been under a torn tarp in Bay 7, boxed in by old signage, broken folding chairs, and crates of obsolete concession equipment. Most people saw a dead car. Lucas saw the shape first: long hood, short deck, E-body stance sitting tired on half-flat tires. Even under dust, the orange paint caught a memory in him. His father had been a Mopar man, the kind who could identify a year by a fender line and a lie by the way a seller avoided looking at a VIN tag. Lucas had grown up sweeping floors in that garage, learning that history did not announce itself. Sometimes it waited under grease. The storage clerk wanted it gone. The paperwork called it an abandoned vehicle shell with no current title on site, disposed through a storage lien process attached to the old bay. $500 bought the release, the bill of sale, and the right to remove it before the redevelopment crew arrived. Lucas knew it was a risk. Even a rusty Cuda could be worth more than that in parts if the paperwork held, but he also knew enough not to get excited too early. Old cars collected stories the way they collected rust. Most of those stories were lies. After Serena humiliated him outside the VP lane, Lucas moved the Cuda with quiet precision. Ralph Dugan, the local tow contractor who had helped him pull it out, offered to haul it straight to Lucas' little garage before Serena changed her mind and blocked the gate. Ralph was a big man with silver hair and sunburned arms, and on weekends, he talked more about old carburetors than anyone asked him to. He had laughed when Lucas bought the car, but Ralph loved a gamble, especially one with wheels. "You sure you want this headache?" Ralph asked as they guided the Cuda away from the stadium entrance. Lucas glanced toward the practice field, where Owen was jogging with his team, but looking back every few seconds. "For $500, I bought the right to find out what kind of headache it is." Ralph chuckled. "That's the most mechanic answer I ever heard." By noon, the Cuda sat inside Lucas' garage with sunlight falling across the hood through the dusty windows. Owen came in after practice still wearing his cleats, his face flushed from running and from holding in questions. He touched the fender with 2 fingers, then pulled his hand back when dust stuck to his skin. "Dad," he said, "is it really junk?" Lucas had been waiting for that question since the VIP lane. He set down his flashlight and leaned against the workbench. "Some things look bad because they are bad," he said. "Some things look bad because nobody took care of them. You don't know which until you look closer. Mrs. Vale said it was scrap. Lucas nodded. She said what she saw. Owen looked at the car again. What did you see? Lucas almost answered too quickly. He almost said the stamp, the firewall, the wrong overspray, the old radiator support mark that had been hidden by grime. Instead, he looked at his son and remembered Maya telling him once. Years ago, that Owen did not need a father who sounded certain all the time. He needed one who told the truth gently. I saw enough to be careful. That afternoon, careful meant not tearing the car apart like a treasure hunter. Lucas rolled a stool to the driver's side and opened the door slowly, wincing as the hinges protested. The interior smelled like vinyl, dust, and old rain. The black seat covers were split, foam pushing through like yellowed bone. Owen stood nearby with a flashlight, proud to be useful. Lucas checked under the dash, the glove box, the door jamb. He photographed everything before touching anything. When Owen asked why, Lucas said, because proof has a memory, and you don't want to be the person who damages it. The engine bay held a 346-barrel V8, dirty and still, with linkages stiff from time. Lucas did not try to start it. He did not pour fuel down the carburetor for drama. He did not hook a battery and pray for a miracle while cameras rolled. He knew old engines could be ruined by impatience. Instead, he checked whether the block looked original to the car, whether the mounts had been hacked, whether the wiring had been disturbed by fools. The Cuda did not tell him everything, but it told him enough to keep going. Near the radiator support, Lucas found the second clue. A small tag, partly bent and hidden beneath dirt, carried a sequence that did not match the clean pattern he expected from a regular production car. It was not proof by itself. Nothing was proof by itself. But together with the PX-17 stamp on the firewall, it made the air in the garage feel different. Owen noticed his father had gone quiet again. "Is that good?" he whispered. "It might be important," Lucas said. "Important like money." Lucas smiled faintly. "Important like history. Money is what people argue about after history makes them pay attention." He moved to the back seat after that, not because he expected magic, but because old Mopars had a habit of hiding paperwork where time and mice could fight over it. The rear seat fought him for 10 minutes. One bolt had seized, another had been replaced with the wrong head. Owen handed him tools from the tray and tried not to talk too much. When Lucas finally lifted the cushion, dust and dry leaves fell onto the floor. There, tucked into the springs and half-eaten by age, was a brittle piece of paper no bigger than a folded postcard. Lucas did not grab it. He put on gloves. He slid cardboard beneath it. He lifted it like something alive. The paper was incomplete, stained, and torn across several printed lines, but there were codes on it, not enough to declare victory, enough to make Lucas take a long breath through his nose. Owen leaned closer. "Is that from the car? I think it might be part of a broadcast sheet." "What's that?" "It's like a birth note from the factory," Lucas said. "It tells people what the car was supposed to be, before the world got its hands on it." Owen absorbed that in the serious way children do when they know adults are trying not to get excited. "Do people have those?" Lucas looked at him. "Maybe we do. Not on paper. By evening." Serena had already turned irritation into policy. Derek Shaw arrived at Lucas' garage with a folded notice in his hand and the expression of a man who wished his boss had sent someone else. He knocked on the open door frame, even though there was no door to knock on. Lucas was photographing the broadcast sheet fragment under a desk lamp. Owen was doing math homework at the workbench, his cleats drying beside him. "Lucas," Derek said, "I need you to read this." Lucas took the paper. It was a removal notice citing obstruction, visual nuisance, and redevelopment access requirements. The language was official enough to scare anyone who did not read carefully. The deadline was 24 hours. "The car is inside my rented bay," Lucas said. "The bay is on stadium-controlled property. The lease says I am current through the end of the month." Derek rubbed the back of his neck. "Serena wants the East Row cleared. Investors are touring the expansion corridor Monday. That's not the same as legal authority to remove my property." Derek lowered his voice. "I am not here to fight you. I am telling you she is serious if that car is still here tomorrow. She call it abandoned or hazardous or whatever legal decides sounds best." Owen had stopped doing homework. Lucas folded the notice once and placed it on the bench, not because he was calm inside, but because Owen was watching Tell Legal. "I have a bill of sale, a storage lien, disposition receipt, and an abandoned property release. If they want copies, I'll provide them." Derek glanced at the Cuda. "Man to man, what is this thing worth?" Lucas looked at the faded orange car, at the broken windshield catching the last light of the day. That's what everybody keeps getting wrong, he said. They ask what it's worth before they ask what it is. The next morning, Ralph Dugan arrived with his tow truck, coffee in one hand, confusion in the other. He had been called by stadium operations. Not Lucas. That alone told Lucas Serena had escalated. Ralph stepped into the garage, saw Owen sitting on an overturned crate, and immediately looked uncomfortable. Lucas, Ralph said. I got a work order. I didn't request a tow. I know. Lucas wiped his hands and walked over. Then you're not hooking my car. Ralph held up both palms. I'm not here to steal from you. Serena's office says it's on property scheduled for removal. I told them I know you. They told me to do my job. Lucas handed him the paperwork without drama. Bill of sale, release, receipt. The $500 number sat there in black ink, humble and ridiculous, the same number Serena had used to make people laugh. Ralph read the pages slowly. His face changed from business to curiosity. You really bought it, he said. I really bought it. Ralph glanced at the Cuda. You got a title in process, but I have lawful possession, and the release covers the bay disposition. That is more paper than half the cars I haul. Ralph sighed, then walked around the Cuda. What made you buy it? Lucas hesitated. This was the moment when a foolish man brags and a careful man decides who deserves the truth. Ralph was not polished, but he was not cruel. Lucas lifted the hood again and pointed his flashlight toward the firewall. Look there. Don't touch it. Just look. Ralph leaned in. At first he squinted like he expected nothing. Then he stopped breathing for a beat. He shifted the flashlight angle and the rough stamp caught shadow. PX-17. Ralph's coffee cup lowered slowly. Is that factory? He asked. That's what I am trying to find out. Ralph moved closer, then caught himself and stepped back as if the car had become fragile. Don't clean that, he said. The words were quiet, but everyone in the garage heard them. Derek had come in behind Ralph, holding his phone, ready to document the tow. Nia Alvarez, Serena's legal coordinator, had arrived in a stadium golf cart with a folder against her chest. She had been expecting another nuisance, another messy man arguing about rules. Instead, she saw a tow contractor, a mechanic, and an operations manager all staring at the same small patch of metal as if the room had tilted. For the first time since Serena called the car junk, no one laughed. Ralph straightened. I am not towing this until legal clears ownership in writing. Derek frowned. Ralph, the work order came from Serena's office. Then Serena's office can sign that they retaking responsibility for removing a potentially documented collector vehicle from a tenant's leased bay. Ralph handed the work order back. I tow a lot of junk. This might not be junk. That was the first silence. Not the big silence. Not the VIP room silence that would come later with suits and collectors and a number no one could ignore. This was smaller, rougher, and maybe more important because it happened before anyone powerful had permission to believe Lucas. It happened in a cracked floor garage beside a soccer stadium, with a boy holding his breath and a rusted Cuda sitting under fluorescent lights like an old witness. Nia stepped forward. Mr. Mercer, may I see your documents? Lucas studied her. Copies, not originals. Copies are fine, she said it carefully, and Lucas understood she was not Serena. Not exactly. Nia was the person who made sure Serena's decisions turned into files. Signatures, deadlines, and risk. She looked young enough to be underestimated and tired enough to have learned from it. Lucas made copies on the old scanner by the sink, while Owen watched Ralph circle the car without touching it. You think my dad was right? Owen asked him. Ralph glanced at Lucas, then at the boy. I think your dad knows where to look. That answer did something to Owen's face. It did not erase the hurt from the stadium entrance. It did not make the laughter disappear, but it gave the boy a place to put it. After they left, Lucas locked the garage and took photographs from every angle Martin Keene would want. The firewall stamp, the radiator support tag, the partial broadcast sheet, the trunk lip, the spot welds near the inner fender. He worked slowly, not because he had time, but because haste was how poor men lost proof. Owen held the work light until his arms got tired, then switched hands without complaint. Who are you sending them to? Owen asked. An old archivist named Martin Keene. Is he famous? To the right people. Do you know him? Lucas paused. I met him years ago. Back when I worked around cars like this more often. Owen looked up. You never told me that. There are a lot of things I stopped talking about after your mom died. The garage went quiet. Lucas regretted the heaviness as soon as it landed. But Owen did not look away. He only turned the little yellow ball keychain in his hand, the one he had clipped to his backpack after practice. Mom would have liked this car, Owen said. Lucas smiled with sadness in it. Your mom liked anything people gave up on too early. He sent the email at 9:47 p.m. The subject line was simple. Possible 1970 Cuda pilot stamp PX-17. He attached the photos and wrote only facts. Purchased through storage lien disposition. Faded vitamin C orange hardtop. 346 barrel present. Firewall hand stamp appears under overspray. Partial sheet recovered from rear seat. Requesting paid consultation if warranted. Lucas read the message twice before sending it. He did not ask Martin to make him rich. He did not ask him to prove Serena wrong. He only asked him what the car was. At 10:18 p.m. Serena called. Lucas almost let it go to voicemail. Then he looked at Owen asleep on the old office couch under his jacket, homework folder on the floor, and answered quietly. Lucas Mercer, he said. Serena did not waste time. You created a problem today. I protected my property. You embarrassed my operations manager in front of a contractor. Lucas looked through the garage window at the stadium lights glowing beyond the fence. No, the car did that. There was a pause on the line. Let me be clear. That garage row is being reviewed for redevelopment. Month-to-month leases are not permanent rights. I can make your little arrangement very uncomfortable. I'm sure you can, then be practical. I will reimburse your $500 and add another $2,000 for your trouble. Sign the vehicle over to the stadium disposal vendor. Clear the bay, and this ends politely. Lucas looked at the Cuda. $2,000 would cover overdue utilities, Owen's tournament fee, groceries, and the brake pads on his pickup. It was not nothing, that was the cruelty of it. Serena knew how to offer an amount small enough to insult him but large enough to tempt a tired father. No, Lucas said. Her voice sharpened. Because you think that rusted thing is your lottery ticket because I don't sell what I haven't identified. You are a maintenance worker. I am a father first, Lucas said, and tonight. I am the legal owner of a car you tried to tow without checking the paperwork. For the first time, Serena did not answer quickly. When she did, the silk had left her voice. Enjoy your victory, Mr. Mercer. Small men often mistake delay for power. She hung up. Lucas stood in the quiet garage for a while with the phone in his hand. He was not fearless. Fear was in the unpaid bills. In the lease language, in the knowledge that Serena could make calls he could not afford to fight. Fear was in the way Owen slept curled up on a couch because his father was still working past 10 at night. But fear was not the same as surrender. Lucas opened Martin Keena's old contact card again, checked that the email had sent, and then returned to the car. At 11:36 p.m. the reply arrived. Lucas saw the name first, Martin Keene. For a moment he did not click it. He only stared, suddenly aware of how loud the garage lights were, how still the Cuda seemed, how close the stadium stood beyond the fence like a giant glass machine. Then he opened the message. Martin had written only 4 lines. Do not clean the firewall further. Do not remove the tag. Photograph the left trunk gutter and underside of rear seat frame in natural light. PX-17 may be significant. If the broadcast fragment matches what I think it does, this car might be real. Lucas read the last sentence twice, then a third time. This car might be real. On the couch, Owen stirred but did not wake. Lucas looked at the faded orange Cuda, at the cracked windshield and tired tires and old dust Serena had called trash. He did not smile. Not yet. He simply placed one hand on the fender, careful as a promise, and whispered into the empty garage, then let's not let them bury you. Outside, across the lot, Serena Valley stood in her office above the VIP entrance. Looking down at the old garage row, with her phone pressed to her ear, she had already asked Derek for every lease file connected to Lucas Mercer. She had already asked Naya how quickly a tenant could be removed for redevelopment access. And now, after hearing that a tow contractor had refused the job, and that a retired archivist's name had appeared in IAS notes, Serena made a different decision. If Lucas wanted attention, she would give him attention. Not in his garage. Not in the shadows where sympathy could protect him. She would bring the little mechanic and his rusted car into the VIP sponsor preview. Under lights, under cameras, in front of people who understood money and reputation. And there, she would make sure the room saw what she had seen from the beginning. A poor man. A junk car, and a story too inconvenient to survive daylight. By morning, the old garage beside Harbor Point Soccer Stadium no longer felt hidden. Lucas noticed it before sunrise. When he arrived with Owen's backpack over one shoulder and found a black SUV idling near the fence, no one stepped out. No one needed to. The vehicle was there to be seen, a polished reminder that Serena Valley had more people, more cameras, more lawyers, and more ways to turn a Father's Day into a problem. Lucas unlocked the rolling door and lifted it slowly. The 1970 Plymouth Cuda sat where he had left it. Faded vitamin C orange under the fluorescent lights, hood closed, dust still protecting the secrets that impatience could ruin. Owen stood beside him, quieter than usual, turning the yellow soccer ball keychain between his fingers. "Are they going to take it?" Owen asked. Lucas looked at the SUV, then at the car. Not if paperwork still means something. Inside the garage, he followed Martin Keene's instructions exactly. He photographed the left trunk gutter in natural light, using a white card to bounce brightness into the seam. He photographed the underside of the rear seat frame without removing any more than necessary. He took a close shot of the radiator support tag, then a wider shot that showed the tag in place. He did not scrape, he did not polish, he did not chase the fantasy of making the car look better. That was what Serena still did not understand. The Cuda did not need beauty yet. It needed protection. It needed someone who knew the difference between dirt and evidence. At 8:12 a. M. Martin replied with a phone call instead of an email. His voice was dry, old, and careful. The voice of a man who had spent his life disappointing people who wanted certainty too quickly. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "I am not confirming anything over the phone." "I understand," Lucas said. "No," Martin replied, "I need you to understand why I am not confirming anything, because if I say what I think I am looking at, and that car is mishandled, repainted, power washed, moved carelessly, or grabbed by someone trying to turn it into a headline, a piece of history could be damaged before it is verified." Lucas looked at the firewall. "Then tell me what to do." "Do nothing dramatic," Martin said. "Keep it indoors. Keep every document. Do not let anyone remove the broadcast fragment. Do not let anyone from the stadium touch the firewall. And if Ms. Vale wants a public answer, she can have one only under written access terms, with witnesses, and with your ownership documents preserved." Lucas almost smiled. "You already know about Ms. Vale. People like Ms. Vale usually arrive before the truth does." The public answer came faster than Lucas expected. By late morning, Nia Alvarez walked into the garage carrying not a threat but a folder. She looked as if she had not slept much. Behind her, Derek Shaw waited near the door, unwilling to step too close to the car after what Ralph had said the day before. Nia placed the folder on Lucas's workbench, away from the broadcast sheet fragment. "Serena wants the vehicle brought into the stadium loading corridor this afternoon," she said. "There is a VIP sponsor preview tonight. She wants the matter addressed in front of the board, the expansion partner, and several invited collectors." Lucas gave a humorless laugh. "She wants to put me on trial." Nia did not deny it. "She wants to control the story, then she can control it without my car." Nia opened the folder. "That is why I prepared this before coming here." She slid a document toward him. "Temporary Consultant Access Agreement. It states you are attending voluntarily, as the current lawful possessor of the vehicle, under the storage disposition documents. The stadium does not claim ownership for the purpose of tonight's review. No one touches, moves, cleans, or opens any part of the vehicle without your written consent or Mr. Keene's instruction. The vehicle is transported by Ralph Dugan only, under your supervision. There is a liability waiver, an evidence preservation clause, and a payment line for your time." Lucas stared at her. "Serena agreed to this?" Nia's mouth tightened. "Serena has not read every line yet." Derek looked alarmed. "Nia." She ignored him. "But the board council will. I copied them for the first time since the humiliation outside the VIP entrance." Lucas saw the shape of a crack in Serena's wall. Not a victory. Not yet. Just a crack. Nia was not choosing him because she liked him. She was choosing the record because records had a way of surviving powerful moods. Lucas read every line. He called Martin and read him the critical paragraphs. Martin demanded one more clause. If the review determined possible historical significance, custody would remain with Lucas until escrow. Insurance, or a court-recognized preservation arrangement, was created. Nia added it by hand, initialed the change, and told Derek to photograph the initials. Only then did Lucas sign. Serena saw the Cuda enter the stadium through the service tunnel at 4:38 p.m. Ralph's truck moved slowly, hazard lights blinking against the concrete walls. Lucas walked beside the car like a guard. Owen followed with Nia, wearing his blue soccer jacket and trying to look older than 9. The tunnel opened beneath the stadium, where forklifts, catering carts, and luxury suite deliveries moved in organized chaos. People stopped working when the faded orange Cuda rolled past. Some smiled at it like a joke, some took pictures. Serena stood near the elevator bank, with her arms crossed, her expression polished for an audience. "You brought your son," she said. Lucas looked at Owen, then back at her. "You brought yours." Serena frowned. "Excuse me?" Lucas nodded toward the glass elevator, where board members, sponsors, investors, and collectors were already arriving upstairs. "Your image, your company, your stadium. We both brought what we were responsible for." It was the first thing he had said that made Serena's face change in public. Not anger exactly. Recognition, maybe, that the man she had dismissed was not going to perform embarrassment on command. She recovered quickly and turned to Nia. "I assume the paperwork is in order." "It is," Nia said. "Board council has copies." That answer landed badly. Serena's eyes shifted to Nia, and something cold passed between them. But the elevator doors opened before she could respond, and Amelia Ross stepped out with a small group behind her. Amelia was in her 50s, composed, silver-haired, and known in collector circles for buying fewer cars than she could afford and preserving them better than museums expected. She did not look at Serena first. She looked at the Cuda. "That is the car?" Amelia asked. Serena smiled thinly. "That is the object causing all this disruption." Amelia walked toward the vehicle, stopped before touching it, and looked at Lucas. "May I?" "Please don't touch the firewall," Lucas said, "but you can look." That simple permission shifted the room before they even reached the room. A woman Serena had invited as a sponsor was asking the maintenance worker for access. Derek saw it. Nia saw it. Owen saw it too, and his fingers closed around the yellow keychain. The VIP room had been designed to flatter rich people. Glass walls overlooked the field, where the evening lights had come on and the green turf glowed below. Tables were set with white flowers and small plates. A charity banner stood near the bar, promising youth sports access for underserved neighborhoods. Serena had planned to announce an expansion partnership there, a new premium entrance, new VIP parking, new retail space where the old service garages stood. Instead, a rusted 1970 Plymouth Cuda sat below in the loading display area visible through the interior glass. And the conversation in the room kept drifting toward it. Serena took control as soon as she could. She stood near the head of the conference table, with Lucas at one side, Nia beside the board council, Amelia near the windows, and Owen seated quietly in the back with a bottle of water he had not opened. Martin Keene had not arrived yet. Serena knew it, and Lucas could tell she intended to use the gap. "Ladies and gentlemen," Serena said, "thank you for indulging this interruption. As many of you know, redevelopment around Harbor Point requires difficult decisions. Sometimes those decisions are complicated by sentiment, misinformation, and people who mistake old metal for historical importance." Lucas said nothing. Serena clicked a remote. A photo appeared on the screen, the Cuda outside the VIP entrance. Rust visible, windshield cracked. Lucas standing beside it in his work shirt. Someone had taken the picture during the humiliation. Owen looked down. "This vehicle was acquired for $500 from a storage clearance," Serena continued. "Mr. Mercer has suggested it may have unusual value. Rather than allow rumors to distract from tonight's sponsor preview, I invited him here so the matter can be resolved transparently." Nia looked at Lucas as if to say, "Hold steady." Serena turned toward him. "Mr. Mercer, do you want to tell this room that your $500 scrap car is worth more than the expansion project it is obstructing?" Lucas stood slowly. He did not look at the screen. He looked at the people. "No," he said. Serena blinked. "No, I don't know what it is worth. I know what I found. There is a difference." That stopped a few whispers. Lucas took a folder from his bag and laid out copies, not originals. Bill of sale, storage lien disposition receipt, abandoned property release, photographs of the PX-17 stamp, the pilot-style radiator support tag, the partial broadcast sheet, the rear seat frame marks, the trunk gutter. He spoke plainly, almost too quietly for a room used to confident exaggeration. "I bought the car legally. I found marks that did not match an ordinary story. I contacted a qualified archivist. I refused to let it be towed because the evidence needed to be preserved. I am not asking anyone here to believe me because I am loud. I am asking you to wait for the person qualified to answer." The elevator doors opened behind him. Martin Keene entered without drama. Wearing a brown jacket, carrying a flat archival case and moving slowly enough that nobody could mistake him for a man chasing attention. He apologized for being late, blamed traffic, and asked for a clean table. Serena introduced him with the tight voice of someone realizing the performance had slipped out of her hands. Martin did not care. He placed photographs, old microfilm printouts, and a magnifying loupe on the table. Then he asked Lucas to confirm that the car had not been cleaned or altered since the previous night. Lucas confirmed. Ralph, standing near the back wall in a borrowed blazer that did not fit him well, confirmed the same. Nia documented both statements. For the next 20 minutes, the room learned the difference between a story and a record. Martin did not give a lecture. He gave proof. He showed how the PX-17 mark sat beneath old overspray, not on top of fresh tampering. He showed how the radiator support tag matched a pilot tracking pattern used before regular production tagging settled into its cleaner rhythm. He showed how the partial broadcast sheet carried enough surviving code to align with a narrow internal sequence. He showed a grainy factory archive image of a vitamin C orange E-body hardtop used in a pre-production evaluation set, then pointed to a small irregularity near the left inner fender. Most people, Martin said, would have destroyed the most important evidence by trying to make the car prettier. His finger rested on Lucas' photograph of the firewall. Mr. Mercer did not restore it. He recognized it. That was the second silence, beginning before anyone knew it. Serena's sponsor representative stopped tapping his pen. A board member leaned forward. Amelia Ross removed her glasses and looked from the photo to Lucas. Owen, in the back of the room, sat perfectly still. Serena tried once more. She had to. Mr. Keene, with respect, are you saying this is valuable or merely interesting? Martin turned to her. I am saying this is not a clone. This is not an ordinary abandoned shell. Based on the physical evidence presently visible, the documentation recovered, and the archive references I brought tonight, I am prepared to identify this vehicle as PX-17. A previously unaccounted for pre-production 1970 Plymouth Cuda hardtop associated with factory evaluation circulation. Full certification will require controlled inspection, but the identity is, in my professional opinion, substantially supported. The room went silent, not quiet, silent. Below the glass, the faded orange Cuda sat under loading bay lights with its cracked windshield and dusty hood, unchanged by the words spoken above it. That was the strange power of the moment. The car had not become different. The room had. The people who had seen junk 5 days earlier were now staring at the same rust with new eyes, as if value had been waiting there the whole time, and they had been the ones too poor in patience to see it. Amelia Ross was the first to speak. Mr. Mercer, assuming escrow, title completion, and preservation review, I would like to submit a letter of intent for purchase. Serena's head turned Amelia. This is not an auction. No, Amelia said. It is an opportunity before someone careless turns it into a lawsuit. She looked at Lucas. $1.38 million, subject to verification and clean transfer. I would also pay for immediate insured storage and a preservation plan overseen by Mr. Keene or his chosen specialist. Owen did not understand the full number. He understood the silence after it. He understood the way adults looked at his father now, not with pity, not with amusement, but with the uncomfortable respect people show when they realize they have been unfair in public. Lucas took a breath. I am willing to review the offer, he said, but the car does not leave my custody tonight unless my attorney, Mr. Keene, and the title office agree on the process. Serena laughed once, but this time there was no power in it. Your attorney? Nia spoke before Lucas could. Board counsel can recommend a preservation escrow attorney. Given the stadium's attempted removal order, that would protect all parties. Serena stared at her. Nia, that is not your decision to make. No, Nia said. Her voice shook, but she did not stop. But the board should know there is an internal memo from yesterday morning directing operations to classify the vehicle as a visual nuisance before ownership review was complete. There is also a draft communication referring to Mr. Mercer's claim as a fabrication before Mr. Keene examined the evidence. The board counsel looked up sharply. You have copies? Yes. Serena's face hardened. You are misunderstanding routine operational language. The expansion partner, a man who had spoken warmly about Serena an hour earlier, closed his folder. Serena, our investment committee will not proceed with Monday's announcement until this is reviewed. We cannot attach our brand to a property dispute involving possible mishandling of a historic asset and a tenant under active lease. That was the consequence Serena had not calculated. Humiliation she could survive, anger she could redirect, but delayed capital, board scrutiny and sponsor concern were not emotions. They were damage. Around the table, people were already rewriting the story without asking her permission. The poor single dad was no longer a nuisance. The rusted car was no longer trash. The CEO was no longer the only adult in the room who mattered. Martin gathered his papers. I recommend the car remain secured overnight under joint observation. No cleaning, no transport except to insured storage. And no public statement implying fraud by Mr. Mercer. Board counsel nodded, agreed. Serena stood very still. And what would you like me to say publicly, for the first time all night? Lucas looked directly at her. The truth would be new. No one laughed. That made it land harder. By 10 p.m., a temporary preservation agreement had been signed, not a perfect ending. Not instant wealth, not a fairy tale where a check appeared and every problem dissolved. Real life had papers, escrow conditions, title verification, insurance binders, and people paid by the hour to argue over commas. But the direction had changed. The stadium withdrew the removal notice. The Garage Row S redevelopment clearance was frozen pending review. Vail Sports Holdings issued a short correction stating that Lucas Mercer had acquired the vehicle through documented storage disposition and that the company regretted any premature characterization of the asset or its owner. Serena did not write the apology herself, but her name sat beneath it because the board required it. The next morning, her expansion announcement was postponed. The investor partnership did not collapse entirely, but it no longer belonged to Serena alone. The board created an oversight committee for the redevelopment project and removed her authority to issue tenant clearance orders without legal review. Nia was transferred out of Serena's direct reporting line and into board operations, which was corporate language for surviving a powerful person's anger because the record had been on your side. Derek stopped avoiding Luca's eyes. Ralph told everyone at the diner that he had nearly towed $1 million Cuda and would be thinking about it until he died. Lucas did not become loud. That disappointed a few people who wanted him to perform victory. He did not call Serena names. He did not stand in the VIP room and tell every person exactly how wrong they had been. He had learned long ago that dignity was not the same as revenge. Dignity was being able to walk your son through the same entrance where you had been mocked and not lower your head. 2 days later, Lucas and Owen sat outside the garage in the early evening while the stadium lights warmed up for a youth match. The Cuda was still inside, now roped off with a temporary barrier and covered only with breathable archival cloth over the most exposed areas. Amelia's letter of intent was in escrow review. Martin had arranged for a controlled inspection. A lawyer had called Lucas, Mr. Mercer, so many times that Owen had started smiling every time it happened. Nothing was finished, but for the first time in years, Lucas could imagine a future that did not begin with catching up. Owen sat on the curb in his soccer socks, swinging his cleats by the laces. "Dad," he said, "were you always this good?" Lucas leaned back against the garage wall, across the lot. The VIP entrance reflected the sunset. 5 days earlier, Serena's laughter had bounced off that glass. Now the same glass only reflected sky. "No," he said, "I learned. Your grandpa taught me some. Life taught me some. Mistakes taught me the rest." Owen thought about that. "Why didn't you tell people before?" Lucas looked into the garage at the shape of the Cuda under soft light. "After your mom died, I didn't want to prove things to rooms anymore. I just wanted to keep you okay." Owen turned the yellow soccer ball keychain in his hand. "She would have told you to prove it." Lucas smiled, and this time the sadness in it did not win. He heard May's voice then, not as a ghost, not as a wound, but as a memory finally gentle enough to carry. "Value isn't loud." She had said it years ago while watching him fix a neighbor's car after dinner, when the neighbor could not pay full price, and Lucas did the job right anyway. Value isn't loud. It just keeps showing up until someone honest notices. "I think," Lucas said, "she would have told me not to let someone else name what mattered." Owen leaned against him for a while. They said nothing. The sounds of the soccer field drifted over the pavement, whistles and shouts, and the thump of a ball being kicked by children who did not yet know how many ways the world would try to price them. Lucas put an arm around his son's shoulders. The garage behind them was still small. The car inside was still rusty. The future still required signatures, inspections, taxes, decisions, and caution. But Owen was not looking at the stadium anymore. He was looking at his father. On Saturday morning, 1 week after the humiliation, Owen's team gathered near the same entrance where Serena had called the car scrap. A few parents recognized Lucas and grew awkward in the way people do when they remember laughing too early. One father approached him and started to apologize, but Lucas saved him from making it a performance. "It's all right," Lucas said. "Just teach your boy to look closer next time." Owen heard that, and his chest lifted a little, not because his father had become rich. The money was still paperwork. Not because the car had become famous. Fame was just noise with better lighting. Owen stood taller because the world had tried to make his father small in front of him, and his father had answered without becoming cruel. He had answered with patience, with proof, with hands that knew where to look. Serena Valley remained CEO, but not untouched. The board's correction stayed public. The expansion delay cost her a collector partnership tied to the charity preview. And Amelia Ross moved her sponsorship to a preservation program that included youth mechanics training in Lucas's garage once the paperwork cleared. That hurt Serena more than a shouted insult ever could have. She had wanted the old garage row erased for VIP parking. Instead, the smallest bay on that row became the place donors asked to see, not because it was polished, because it had told the truth. Late that afternoon, Lucas rolled the garage door halfway up and let Owen place a small sign on the workbench. It was written in careful marker on a scrap of cardboard, "Look closer." Owen had added a tiny orange car beside the words and a soccer ball next to it. Lucas laughed softly when he saw it. "Too much?" Owen asked. Lucas shook his head. "No, that S exactly enough." Inside, under the quiet light, the 1970 Plymouth Cuda waited for its next chapter. It was not restored. It was not shining. It did not need to be. The cracked windshield still held its line. The faded vitamin C orange paint still carried rust. The PX-17 stamp remained under careful protection, small and rough and powerful enough to humble a room built for important people. Lucas stood beside the car with his son at his side, and for once, nobody near the stadium called it junk. More importantly, nobody near Owen called his father small. The boy slipped his hand into Lucas's, and together they looked at the old Cuda, the little garage, and the field lights beyond the fence. They had not rebuilt everything in 5 days. They had done something better. They had recognized what was worth saving before the world learned how to price it.